I think it deserves a podcast.
It really does have all the elements. No one gets home confinement when they admit to hiring a hitman, especially if the hitman succeeds. Unless you're political insider Sean Cattle, who admitted to hiring the hitman who, along with an accomplice, stabbed Mike Galdieri and torched his apartment in 2014.
In a shocking and tragic incident that unfolded on May 22, 2014, Jersey City's political landscape was forever altered when Michael Galdieri, a political operative, was found dead in his home office. What followed was a tale of betrayal, revenge, and a murder-for-hire plot that would send shockwaves through the community. Galdieri's family had deep political roots, with his father having served as a state senator and his grandfather briefly in the state assembly. On that fateful day in 2014, Galdieri's life came to a gruesome end. His body bore the marks of a brutal attack, with multiple stab wounds to his neck, head, and torso. To make matters worse, his residence had been set on fire. As investigators delved deeper into the case, a motive for the murder began to emerge. It was a story of personal disputes and allegations of theft that had spiraled out of control. Central to the entire ordeal was Sean Cattle, a Democratic political consultant who had once been a friend and business partner of Galdieri. Cattle had a list of prominent clients, including current Democratic Senator Bob Menendez and former Democratic State Senator Raymond Lesniak. Cattle claimed that Michael Galdieri, who was employed at Cattle's consulting firm, had been embezzling funds and making threats to expose Cattle's illicit activities. Cattle, in a cowardly act, hired two men with long criminal records, George Bratsinis and Bomani Africa, to carry out the murder of Michael Galdieri. Cattle and Bratsinis were connected through Cattle's brother, who had served a sentence in the same New Jersey prison where Bratsinis had been incarcerated. According to prosecutors, a working relationship between George Bratsinis and Sean Cattle began in 2013 during a state Senate campaign shortly after Bratsinis was released from prison. During a dinner at Sean Cattle's home in March or April 2014, Cattle disclosed that he was aware of Bratsinis' extensive criminal history, including a murder he had committed back in 1984. Before I proceed with the story, I've conducted an extensive search for a photograph of Bomani Africa, whose real name is Baxter Keys, but regrettably, I've been unable to find one. If you happen to come across a picture of him, please don't hesitate to inform me in the comments, and I'll share it. During the dinner conversation, Cattle expressed his desire to have someone killed and inquired if Bratsinis could find someone willing to commit the murder for $15,000. Cattle specified that he wanted Michael Galdieri to be killed within 30 days and provided Bratsinis with an initial payment ranging between $2,000 and $4,000. Following this discussion, Bratsinis recruited Bomani Africa for the task. Bratsinis and Africa then conducted surveillance on Michael Galdieri's apartment. On May 22, Bratsinis made a trip from Connecticut to a Newark bus station where he picked up Africa, who had traveled from Pennsylvania to join him. Upon gaining access to Galdieri's apartment, the pair carried out the brutal and fatal attack, stabbing Michael to death. To conceal their crime, Bratsinis set Michael's apartment on fire.
You have a murder and you have perhaps political corruption, and you don't know if they're linked in any way. There's no indication that they are, but when you're dealing in this world, you can't dismiss everything. And it's not every day you see something like that. It's not just a ho-hum corruption case. There's actually somebody lost their life here.
I know Mike Galdieri from high school.
Hudson County Commissioner Bill O'Day has seen it all after 30-plus years in the capital of bare-knuckle politics, Hudson County. He knows all the players in this murder mystery and thinks these are the early stages of a potentially wider story.
If there's a crazy wave of voter fraud and election violations, none of that at this point would shock me. If it turns out there's other murders, that now at this point wouldn't shock me.
The other murder O'Day is referring to is the still unsolved deaths of Cooper Health System CEO John Sheridan, the former state transportation commissioner, and his wife Joyce, who were found stabbed to death, their home torched, also in 2014. In January, the New York Times reported that Sheridan's son Mark had asked prosecutors to reopen the case because of the eerie similarities between the two, further stoking the intrigue.
Galdieri and Sean Cattle worked in Hudson County. Sean Cattle worked for Ray Lesniak in Union County. There were payments to the current Senate President's Chief of Staff in Union County. The potential similarities with the Sheridan's case, the then president of Cooper Hospital, which gets us into Camden County. So part of it is how many orbits this touches on.
The guy was my campaign manager. That's it.
One of the names that has been associated with this story is former State Senator Ray Lesniak, who worked with Cattle on his own and several other political campaigns, and who ran several so-called dark money PACs for Lesniak.
Wait, time out. Campaign payments were made. This speculation is insane. There's a media frenzy over this, this gotcha mentality that the media has problems with, and they're going overboard.
In early 2022, justice began to take its course as George Bratsinis and Bomani Africa pleaded guilty to their roles in the murder-for-hire scheme. Bomani Africa, who also goes by the name Baxter Keys, has been sentenced to a prison term of 20 years. Additionally, George Bratsinis received a prison sentence of 16 years. I believe that both men should have received life sentences for this murder, especially considering their extensive criminal records. Sean Cattle pleaded guilty in January 2022 to federal charges of conspiracy to commit murder for hire. Cattle was sentenced to 24 years in prison.
It is a 20-year prison sentence for a Philadelphia man who was one of two confessed hitmen involved in a murder-for-hire scheme.
Bomani Africa already serving time right now for a string of bank robberies in Connecticut. He learned his fate in federal court in Newark today. No cameras were allowed in that courtroom. News 12 New Jersey's Alex Sedan with our report from Newark tonight.
Depraved, debased, vile. These are the words a federal judge used Thursday to describe the brutal stabbing murder of Michael Galdieri, a former Jersey City Council candidate killed in 2014 as part of a murder-for-hire scheme. One of the two hitmen who carried out the slaying, 62-year-old Bomani Africa, sentenced in federal court in Newark Thursday to 20 years in prison. Prosecutors called the admitted hitman dangerous, but had actually wanted less time in jail for Africa. But Judge John Michael Vasquez called Africa a predator who was not truly remorseful. Both admitted hitmen say the murder for hire was organized by Democratic political operative Sean Cattle, who hired them for $15,000 to kill Galdieri, who was stealing money from Cattle. George Bratsinis and Africa stalked Galdieri, according to the judge, and one night in May 2014, they knocked on his apartment door, he let them in, and they stabbed him in the neck, head, and torso, then set the building on fire. Africa's attorney declined comment as he left court, but inside the courtroom said Africa had an abusive childhood in Paterson, was served alcohol by his father at age 4, and was addicted to heroin in his early teens. Cattle pleaded guilty to the murder-for-hire plot in January 2022, but remains under house arrest, cooperating with investigators. One of those investigations led to the guilty plea of the chief of staff to New Jersey's Senate president. Tony Tex Teixeira pleaded guilty to tax evasion in October in a case connected to fraudulent campaign money. Cattle previously worked for Democratic State Senator Ray Lesniak and U.S. Senator Bob Menendez when Menendez was a congressman. Neither of those men have been implicated in Cattle's schemes. In Newark, Alex Sedan, News 12, New Jersey.
Did we learn anything more about Sean Cattle's motivation in this case? Because a lot of it has been shrouded in some mystery, we'll say, up until this point.
Yes, we did. So it came out first in the sentencing memo that reporters were getting their hands on in the last couple of days. And then it was discussed in court today that, so Michael Galdieri, the victim, who had drug issues, had been given money by Sean Cattle. They were friends and they had worked together. And apparently, Galdieri had told Cattle that he needed more money, and that if Galdieri didn't give him more money, he would expose, criminal activity that, we now know about, which is that Cattle was skimming money off of campaign funds for him and another political operative or staff person to several politicians. And, that's the case that came out later.
And that seemingly was enough to order a hitman to kill his former friend and colleague.
I mean, some things just don't make sense.
Yeah.
So, and the judge wasn't buying it, let's say that. I mean,
what was the judge saying in this case?
Right. So federal prosecutors asked for a 12-year sentence. The normal sentence in this case would be life in prison. Because Cattle had cooperated with federal prosecutors on so-called political corruption case, although it turned into more of just a criminal case, they had agreed to a plea deal that was a range from 12 to 25 years was part of the plea agreement. So the prosecutor came in and said, he was very good with us. He told us the truth. We couldn't have made the case against Antonio Teixeira, the guy that eventually pled guilty, without his cooperation. So we're asking for 15 years, but the judge gave him 24.
Yeah, what did that say about this? Because Sean Cattle is someone, as a political consultant, who knew people in high places. We'll say he had a lot of political connections. And there seemed to be this air that perhaps his knowledge would bring down some other, really big power-wielding folks in the political realm here in New Jersey. And so far, as you mentioned, it's only resulted in a case against Tony Teixeira, who was the former chief of staff to now Senate President Nick Scuteri, as well as being tied to Senator Menendez.
Yes, so I've talked to lots of lawyers and lots of people involved in politics in New Jersey. There is one opinion, really, and that is that more was expected out of Sean Cattle's cooperation. Of course, it was all based on speculation. It was based on the idea that here's a guy who put out a hit and paid two thugs to murder a friend of his, and he was home. He wasn't even in jail awaiting sentencing. He was at home.
It was lenient. They were pretty lenient on him to start. Yeah.
So the belief and the thought is that, wow, he's going to bring down some pretty big name politicians if he's getting this kind of treatment. The prosecutor today said this was an important case. They got a man who was very powerful in Antonio Teixeira. But I think
do we expect another shoe to drop here?
The prosecutor said the case is over. I asked Sean Cattle's defense attorney, Ed Jacobs, if that could possibly be the case, the truth, and he said, well, prosecutors can be very wily, and they might not want to say that they have more coming. But you didn't get the impression, listening to the prosecutor at all, that there's anything more coming than this conviction of Teixeira.
Nancy Solomon, WNYC, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.